There is someone in your life right now. You haven't fully named what they are. Maybe you've tried, and the words felt too large or too final. Maybe you've defended them to others, or to yourself, told yourself the situation was complicated, that people are flawed, that you are patient, and they deserve patience. But something in you knows, something beneath the justifications has been sending the same signal for months. A low, persistent pressure at the edge of every interaction. A subtle heaviness that follows you after each conversation. A quiet erosion you can't trace to any single wound, because it wasn't one wound, it was 1,000 small ones. The question you are afraid to ask is not whether this person loves you or needs you or means well. You know the answers to those questions. The question you are afraid to ask is whether the cost of their presence has exceeded what any relationship, any obligation, should require you to pay. The familiar hesitation. Most people in this position do one of two things. They stay, absorbing the damage because the alternative feels like failure, like cruelty, like the kind of decisiveness they were taught to distrust in themselves. Or they leave but stay adjacent, cutting contact physically while maintaining it emotionally, which is no cut at all. It is prolonged exposure with extra steps. Both of these responses have one thing in common. They protect the other person from accountability while charging you full price for the protection. The pivot. Machiavelli did not write about kindness. He wrote about calculation. And his most underread observation was this. The prince who cannot remove threats from his proximity will eventually become a servant of them. Not because he is weak, because proximity is itself a form of governance, and whoever you allow close to you without terms governs you by default. The promise. Today I am going to give you 4 signs, drawn from Machiavellian psychology and the oldest observations about human power, that a specific person in your life requires permanent removal from your proximity. Not because you are cold, not because relationships should be disposable, but because there is a category of person whose presence, regardless of their intent, functions as a structural liability. And the inability to identify and remove that category is not loyalty, it is managed self-destruction. By the end of this, you will know whether someone in your life belongs in this category, and you will understand for the first time why cutting contact is not an act of cruelty, but one of governance. The named enemy, the corrosive presence. Here is what most people get wrong about harmful relationships. They assume the harm must be visible, loud, obvious, a pattern of open cruelty, public humiliation, or undeniable abuse, the kind that others can see, validate, and give you permission to leave. The most damaging presences in your life do not look like that. The most damaging presences are quiet. They do not strike. They drain. They do not attack your certainty. They introduce doubt so gradually, you eventually mistake it for your own voice. They do not take from you in one visible act. They take in installments, to each one small enough to rationalize, until one morning you look up and realize that the version of yourself you are now is significantly smaller than the one you were before you knew them. The Machiavellian lens. Machiavelli categorized the advisors, companions, and associates of the prince into one essential question. Do they make you more capable or less? Not more comfortable, not more popular, more capable. He was writing about political counsel. But the principle is universal. Every person in your proximity either adds to your architecture or erodes it. There is no neutral presence at close range, and the failure to identify which category a person belongs to is not an act of openness, it is an abdication of governance. The revelation. The most dangerous thing about a corrosive presence is not what they do to your circumstances. It is what they do to your self-perception. They are not taking your opportunities. They are taking the version of you that believed opportunities were available. When someone consistently makes you feel smaller, less certain, less capable, when their presence is something you brace for rather than lean into, the relationship has become structurally predatory, regardless of the feelings involved. The data reframe. The signs I am about to give you are not emotional judgments. They are structural observations. They do not require the other person to be a bad person. They require only that their presence in your proximity produces a specific, identifiable, and consistent pattern. If that pattern exists, regardless of love, history, or obligation, the Machiavellian conclusion is the same. Proximity must end. The psychological mechanism. Before we name the signs, you need to understand the mechanism. Because the reason most people cannot act on what they already sense is not cowardice. It is a specific psychological process that every corrosive presence exploits, consciously or not, to maintain their position in your life. The mechanism. Intermittent reinforcement. The human psychological system is not addicted to pleasure. It is addicted to unpredictable pleasure. The brain releases significantly more dopamine in anticipation of an uncertain reward than a guaranteed one. This is why gambling is more compelling than saving. Why intermittent kindness is more binding than consistent cruelty. The corrosive presence does not maintain their position through consistent harm. They maintain it through alternating cycles, warmth and withdrawal, closeness and rejection, validation and erasure, that keep your nervous system in a perpetual state of seeking. You are not staying because the relationship is good. You are staying because the reward system has been hijacked by its unpredictability. This is why you cannot simply decide to leave. The decision and the action are separated by a nervous system that has been trained to anticipate the next cycle of warmth and will override rational judgment in pursuit of it. Understanding this mechanism is the first act of governance. You are not weak for staying. You are wired for anticipation. Cutting contact is the only intervention that breaks the circuit. The critical distinction. Difficult relationships require work. Corrosive relationships consume work without return. This is the distinction. So every relationship asks something of you. The question is not whether it asks, but whether what it returns justifies what it takes. A relationship that consistently takes more than it returns, not in a temporary season of difficulty, but as its permanent operating condition, is not a relationship. It is a system of extraction. And systems of extraction do not improve with more investment. They improve only when the resource is withdrawn entirely. The signal you carry. Here is what most people do not account for. A corrosive presence does not only damage you in its presence, it alters you in all other rooms. The self-doubt they installed continues operating when they are not there. The vigilance you developed around them follows you into safety. The posture you adopted to survive proximity to them has become, without your consent, or your default architecture. Cutting contact is not just the removal of one person. It is the beginning of the decompression of every room they infiltrated without entering. Comment. I protect my peace like a sovereign protects his kingdom. The 4 signs. These are not feelings. They are patterns. And patterns are the only evidence that matters. Sign 1. They make your victories smaller without touching them. You achieve something. You build something, close something, survive something. The satisfaction is real. And then you tell this person. What happens is not hostility. It is something more precise and more damaging. Minimization. They find the caveat. They remember the version of this that failed before. They remind you of what you have not yet done, or what someone else has done better. They do not say you should not feel good. They simply make certain the feeling does not survive the conversation at full strength. This is the first sign. Not cruelty, precision. The consistent, practiced ability to locate the entry point of your confidence and reduce its pressure without appearing to have touched it. Machiavelli identified this pattern in the advisors most dangerous to a prince, the ones who never openly opposed him, but consistently ensured his vision of himself remained slightly smaller than his actual capability. Because a prince who doubts his own judgment seeks more counsel, and whoever controls the counsel controls the prince. The principle: anyone who cannot allow your victories to be full, who must diminish what you bring to them, consistently and without exception, is not supporting you. They are managing you. You perform a lesser version of yourself in their presence. Notice who you are in the hour before seeing this person. Notice who you are 3 hours after leaving them. If you find yourself preparing, not in the way you prepare for something challenging, but in the way you prepare for something that requires you to be less than you are, smaller, quieter, less direct, more careful about what you reveal, that preparation is a signal. Your nervous system already knows the terms of this relationship. It is compressing you in advance so the impact lands softer. If you find yourself, in their presence, censoring the thoughts you know are valid, moderating the ambitions you know are real, performing a lesser conviction than the one you actually carry, the relationship is extracting something more valuable than money or time. It is extracting your identity in installments. The principle: the people who belong in your proximity should make the best version of you more accessible. Not more comfortable, more capable, more honest, more fully expressed. The person around whom you consistently perform a reduced version of yourself is not your person. They are your ceiling. Sign 3. Their crises require your capacity, but yours require your silence. When they are in crisis, emotional, practical, relational, you are required. Your time, your attention, your energy, your emotional availability. This is presented as the nature of intimacy, of love, of what it means to be someone's person. And you give it, because you understand what it is to need. When you are in crisis, when the situation is reversed and the weight is yours, something shifts. The conversation redirects. Your need is acknowledged and then efficiently minimized or transformed into a new conversation about them, or met with fatigue or absence or advice so generic it functions as dismissal. The bandwidth that was unlimited in one direction simply does not exist in the other. This is the third sign. Not occasional imbalance. Every relationship has seasons. Structural asymmetry. A relationship in which one person is the permanent resource and the other is the permanent consumer. In which the terms of reciprocity only operate in one direction. The principle: Machiavelli wrote that the prince who gives without calculation will always be taken from without end, not because generosity is wrong, but because a system with no reciprocity is not a relationship. It is a tax, and taxes paid indefinitely without governance become a transfer of sovereignty. Sign 4. Your loyalty to them costs you loyalty to yourself. You know what you value. You know what you want to build, who you are trying to become, what principles you have decided to live by. You hold these things with varying degrees of consistency, but you hold them. Now notice, does maintaining your relationship with this person require you to violate those values? Not dramatically, not in visible, undeniable ways, in the quiet ways, the agreements you make on their behalf that contradict your own position. The standards you lower in their presence that you would hold everywhere else. The ambitions you quietly shelve because their proximity makes those ambitions feel unrealistic, selfish, or threatening to the relationship. When loyalty to another person consistently requires disloyalty to yourself, when the relationship is only stable if you are smaller. This is the fourth and most definitive sign, because it means the relationship is not a partnership. It is a replacement. They have not occupied space in your life alongside your identity. They have occupied space instead of it. The principle, Machiavelli's most severe judgment, was reserved for the prince who abandoned his own nature in pursuit of the approval of others. He called it the most dangerous form of weakness, not because it failed visibly, but because it failed silently, until the prince had nothing left to govern with. The self you betray for someone else's comfort does not wait. It simply leaves. And when it is gone, the relationship you sacrificed it for is all that remains, hollow, asymmetric, and permanent in the way that only prisons are permanent. If you recognized yourself in one of these signs, there is information there worth taking seriously. If you recognized yourself in more than one, if the signs are not isolated incidents, but the consistent operating conditions of a specific relationship, then what you are sensing is not paranoia or ingratitude. It is pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is the beginning of governance. Comment: I choose loyalty to myself. I govern the gate. The dark psychology layer, the manipulation. You were not taught to recognize. There is a layer to the corrosive presence that most psychology will not name directly, because naming it requires acknowledging something uncomfortable, that some people are not simply difficult. They are strategically difficult, not all of them consciously. Many operate from patterns installed in them long before they had the self-awareness to examine them. But the effect is the same regardless of the intent. A consistent, systematic method of maintaining access to your emotional resources by keeping you uncertain, obligated, or guilty. The three instruments. The first instrument is doubt installation. The consistent, low-level introduction of uncertainty about your own perceptions. That isn't what happened. You're too sensitive. You always misread things, until the moment arrives when you cannot trust your own assessment of the relationship, at which point your only reference point is them. This is not accidental. A person whose judgment you trust is a person who can leave. A person who doubts their own perception is a person who needs external confirmation, and the source of that confirmation controls the conclusion. The second instrument is guilt as currency, the strategic deployment of obligation, reminders of sacrifice, invocations of history, the careful framing of your independence as abandonment, to ensure that the cost of departure always feels higher than the cost of staying. This is not love. All love does not use your history as leverage against your freedom. What uses history as leverage is a system that cannot maintain itself without the threat of debt. The third instrument is identity replacement, the slow substitution of your own narrative about yourself with theirs. Your ambitions become evidence of selfishness. Your values become evidence of rigidity. Your instincts become evidence of damage, until the person looking back from the mirror is not someone you constructed. It is the person they required you to become to make their proximity sustainable. The Machiavellian closer. Machiavelli's instruction for identifying the dangerous advisor was precise. Do not listen to what they say about your interests. Watch what their presence does to your capacity. If their proximity consistently reduces your clarity, your confidence, your willingness to act on your own judgment, then whatever they say about supporting you is irrelevant. The effect is the only evidence. The same principle applies here. This is not about intentions. A corrosive presence does not require malicious intent to function as corrosion. The question is not whether they love you. The question is whether your proximity to them leaves you more or less capable of governing yourself. And if the answer to that question is consistently less, the Machiavellian conclusion is structurally obvious. The 5 practices. Identifying the pattern is not enough. The gap between recognition and action is where most people remain, indefinitely. What follows are 5 practices that transform the recognition into governance. Practice 1. The honest audit. For the next 7 days, keep a private record. After each significant interaction with this person, write 3 things. What the exchange cost you, in energy, in time, in self-regard, and what it returned. Not what you hope it will return, what it actually returned in this specific exchange. At the end of 7 days, do not interpret the results emotionally. Read them as a Machiavellian strategist reads a balance sheet. The pattern will be visible. You will not need to explain it. Practice 2. The boundary as intelligence. Before you cut contact, establish a boundary, not as a test, as diagnostic intelligence. Name one specific behavior that you will no longer accommodate. Do not explain it at length. Do not negotiate it. Simply hold it. Then observe, how is the boundary met? With respect, adjustment without drama, or with pressure, manipulation, guilt, punishment, or the reframing of your boundary as evidence of your failure. The response to a held boundary is the most accurate available information about whether governance is possible within this relationship or whether removal is the only remaining option. Practice 3. The graduated withdrawal. In most cases, the cleanest removal is also the most gradual, not because it is easier, it is often harder, but because it deprives the corrosive presence of the scene they require to reframe the ending as your failure. Begin with availability. You become less accessible. Response times lengthen. Shared plans become less frequent. There is no announcement, no confrontation, only the quiet, consistent withdrawal of the resource that sustained the dynamic. The relationship recedes. You do not burn it. You simply stop feeding it. Practice 4. The decontamination audit. After physical removal begins, the internal work starts. Identify specifically, what beliefs about yourself did this person install that do not belong to you? What capabilities did you stop exercising in their presence? What ambitions went underground? What version of your judgment stopped being trusted? Name each one. Not to assign blame, to reclaim territory. The beliefs they installed in you are not yours. The diminishment they required of you is not evidence about you. What was placed there can be examined, identified as foreign, and removed. Practice 5. The sovereign re-entry. Once the removal is underway, begin the deliberate practice of reoccupying the rooms that person influenced. The ambitions you shelved, reopen them. The standards you lowered, restore them. The voice you moderated, speak at full volume in private, and let that practice rebuild the architecture before you need it publicly. Sovereign re-entry is not performance. It is excavation. You are not becoming something new. You are returning to something that was interrupted. The version of you that preceded the corrosive presence has not disappeared. It has been waiting. Comment. I am not the sum of what was taken from me. I am what remains after the taking ends. There is a specific moment, and you will know it when it arrives, where the calculation you have been running, the evidence you have been accumulating, the pattern you have been trying to unsee, reaches a threshold of undeniability. It does not arrive as a dramatic revelation. It arrives in the middle of an ordinary exchange, a conversation, a silence, a moment when they do the familiar thing they always do. And instead of the familiar combination of pain and justification, you feel something entirely different. Clarity. Not anger, not grief, not resolve, which can still be undermined. Just clarity. The same quiet, cold, irrevocable clarity you feel when you finally look at a page you have been misreading and see what it actually says. The calculation is complete. The answer is obvious. And the only thing left is the action. What exists beyond it? Beyond that threshold, the relationship becomes historical rather than active. Not because you have stopped feeling, but because you have stopped feeding. The intermittent reinforcement cycle loses its power the moment the reinforcement stops. The doubt they installed loses its authority the moment you stop consulting them as a reference point. The guilt they deployed loses its leverage the moment you recognize it as a tool rather than a truth. What remains when the corrosive presence is removed is not emptiness, it is capacity. The attention you spent managing the dynamic, the energy you spent recovering from interactions, the clarity you spent justifying what you already knew, all of it returns, gradually, then completely. The space a corrosive presence occupied is not a void when they leave. It is space, and space is where sovereign things are built. The Machiavellian sovereign identity. Machiavelli's prince was not defined by what he conquered. He was defined by what he refused to be governed by. The sovereign identity is not built through achievement. It is built through the consistent exercise of one capacity, the ability to look clearly at what something costs you and decide without sentiment whether the terms are acceptable. Most people cannot do this with relationships. They can do it with contracts, with investments, with employment. But the moment emotion is involved, the calculation disappears and the exposure remains. The Machiavellian sovereign applies the same precision to proximity as to policy. Not because people are transactions, because your territory, the interior kingdom you are responsible for governing, is not protected by sentiment. It is protected by decision. And the decision to remove a corrosive presence is not the abandonment of love. It is the exercise of the oldest form of governance, knowing what belongs inside your walls and what does not. I will not tell you this is easy. Cutting contact with someone who has been close to you, regardless of what that closeness cost, is one of the most demanding acts of self-governance available to a human being. The nervous system will resist it. The installed guilt will speak. The intermittent reinforcement will offer one more cycle of warmth at exactly the moment you are closest to the exit. What I will tell you is this. The difficulty is not evidence against the decision. It is evidence of how deeply the extraction has run. The harder it is to leave, the more sovereign the act of leaving is. And the sovereignty you exercise in that hardest moment becomes the foundation of the person you are constructing on the other side of it. There is someone in your life right now. You recognize them in the signs. Maybe in one, maybe in all four. Maybe you have been recognizing them for longer than you want to admit, measuring the pattern against every alternative interpretation, finding the calculation always resolves the same way, and then finding reasons not to act on what the calculation tells you. You are not the same person who began this video. You now understand the mechanism by which a corrosive presence maintains its position. You understand the 4 signs that distinguish difficulty from structural extraction. You understand the practices that transform recognition into governance. The noise they make inside you is not your truth. It is the sound of the intermittent reinforcement cycle losing its power source. Let it run down. The clarity on the other side of it is not emptiness. It is the beginning of a kingdom that is finally, entirely yours. Today you bury one thing. The version of yourself that believed loyalty required self-abandonment, that confused tolerance of extraction with strength, that mistook the difficulty of leaving for evidence you should stay. That version served you once. It kept peace. It maintained proximity. It made certain no one could accuse you of being the one who walked away. Bury it, not as failure, as material. What got buried learned something about what sovereignty costs. What gets excavated has decided to pay it. You are not closing a door. You are reclaiming a kingdom. The territory a corrosive presence occupied was never theirs. It was borrowed against your compliance. What you are doing now, with clear eyes, with the cold intelligence of someone who has finally finished the calculation, is simply withdrawing the compliance. The territory returns, the capacity returns. The version of you that existed before the erosion began is not lost. It is waiting in the rooms they could not reach. This is not the end of your capacity for closeness. It is the beginning of your authority over who receives it. This is not for everyone. Most people will encounter these signs and feel the recognition, and then return to the familiar maintenance of a dynamic that costs them more than they will ever admit to themselves. But the rare individual, the one who is still here, already knows which category they belong to, because they stayed, they listened, and they are now deciding not just to recognize the pattern, but to end it. That decision is the threshold. You are already standing in it. If what you found here today is what you have been looking for, not permission to leave, but the architecture to understand why leaving is governance and not abandonment, then this channel was built for you. The Dark Lens is not a self-improvement channel. It is a reconstruction project. Subscribe and return to it the next time the pattern becomes visible and the calculation needs completing. Comment: I govern the gate. I choose the proximity. I reclaim the territory.